Welcome everybody to the final talk in our series on digital boundaries for healthy living. I've been enjoying applying some of these boundaries to my own life, and we're just going to start with a short video with my co-author and my friend Annie. They were on a podcast, and they talked about, Annie was talking about the importance of delaying starting with the smartphone, and Joshua was talking about the importance of cultivating a positive vision. So I just wanted to share a brief clip about this, which we'll do as people are filing in.
A key principle is delaying as much as possible. Do you agree that a key principle is delaying as much as possible?
Well, I had some notes that were supposed to come on the screen at the same time, but anyway, my technology is failing me. Here we go.
Do everything you can to give your children as long of a human, natural, incarnational, physically focused upbringing as you can. Keep the screens and the phones and the devices pushed as far back as you can so that they are living in this incarnate world close to nature, the things that God has made with their hands in the dirt and their eyes in the sky and the birds and the trees, and really being close to the things that God himself has made. The heavens declare the glory of God. He is speaking to us his presence and the meaning of who he is and our relationship with him through the things that he has made. That's something really important, I think, for Christian parents to recover an understanding of, is that God is communicating to us through his world. And so if we're going to understand him, this is the principle for those in apologetics, general revelation versus special revelation. Right? God communicates to us in general revelation through the creation. He is day unto day pouring forth speed, night unto night giving us knowledge, as Psalm 19 says. And it's actually special revelation, God's word to us in Scripture and the person of Jesus Christ, is actually, in a sense, dependent on general revelation. It's through my experience of trees and fire and skies and the seas and lilies of the field and birds of the air. It's my experience of God's world that then gives those parables and those teachings and those stories in Scripture meaning. And so I think we really need to recognize for our children a life in contact with creation is a very important part of their spiritual formation, so that their contact with God, the glory of God's presence that he's pouring out through the things he's made. It gives them the ability to read Scripture, and it's forming their minds and their spirits in patterns and rhythms that we were made for, if that makes sense. And then the more you can delay that move into a digital space, then the more deeply their bodies, their affections, their habits are rooted in a natural way of living, the more tolerant they will be of the downsides of a digital space. So I like to think about a tree, right? And very much our neurology is very tree-shaped, right? And so if you think of you're growing a tree, if you can let that tree grow under good conditions, then that trunk and those basic branches will be upright and straight and well formed. And then as the secondary branches form, those can grow back and reform fairly well. But if a tree is growing under wind and bizarre light conditions, right, you'll see tree trunks grow sideways, trying to reach the light, trying to deal with the wind. And then once the tree trunks are really formed, you can't grow them upright again. Right? So that's an analogy that really helps me think about my children is that if I let them grow those deep neurological connections and habits whole when they're young, so they've got nice, upright, strong, they'll be able to deal with the secondary challenges of life later on. But if I give them an iPad when they're 4, okay, the fundamental neurological structure of their mind is going to be form bent. And then when you're older, you have less neurological plasticity. When you're older, you have like a tree, you can kind of start to grow this way, but you can't go back and change those fundamental structures of the tree nor of the human mind. This is why childhood trauma is such a big deal, right? Because of the way that the mind and the body is formed in those early years. So that tree analogy is an encouragement to parents. And you know what? There's God's grace, right? God works all things for good. Wherever you are today, do what you can for your children to give them an incarnate, embodied childhood and delay. They can catch up on screens later. We can all learn how to use, a social media app in 2 days. They don't need to practice now. That can wait till later. Do everything you can to delay engagement with that digital world.
That's good. There's a couple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's we want to think about positive formation, right? A lot of times technology, we think about, oh, don't do this, don't do that. But as Annie's saying here, it's more about positive formation, the better alternative that we have, right, in this real embodied world. And so especially with children, we want to build a reservoir of humane embodied experience, right, that roots them deeply in what it means to be an incarnate human being, so that then they can navigate the digital spaces more effectively and efficiently. So yes, that's really important, the positive vision aspect, right? Yes, we have limits and boundaries, but also we're replacing, okay? We're not just saying no to something, we're replacing it with something better, okay? And a lot of things in your home, you can take steps in this direction. Simply thinking about spaces and where you put things, right? So instead of having the computer and the television in a very prominent place in the home, what about having books and a musical instrument and board games prominently placed, right? So that you can, the default is to go to those things, right? Not the screens. There's all sorts of just simple steps you can take. We have quite a bit of this in the book. We have a section on boundaries. And again, both the limit side and the positive vision side, to try to flesh this out and give families ideas, right? We're not saying you must do this or you must do that, but we're throwing ideas out there that are based on research, right? That families have done and tried and saw benefits from. And suggesting them, something you can do. Because as Annie said, wherever you're at now, there's steps you can take in a positive direction. And we need to. We're getting schooled right now by an evolutionary psychologist, okay, an atheist, on these topics. And we have more to say than he does, right? Now, there's a lot of general revelation in here, as Annie said. There's a lot of just common sense truth and research-based truth. But we Christians can go even further. We have more to say than he does. And that's sort of what, we're trying to do in this book, is sort of going from here. This book was just came out when we were finishing this one up. Going from here and going a little bit further with the Christian worldview, and going beyond the home, going beyond the school, into the home, into the church, and so forth. Because a lot of Haidt's advice really relates to schools, right? What we should do with schools. He does have. I'm just going to reiterate his 4 basic pieces of advice. And again, this is from sort of an evolutionary psychologist, just from the research. He has no theological, agenda or anything like that. He says no smartphones before high school. No social media before the age of 16. He says schools should be phone-free, and that there should be far more unsupervised play and childhood independence, right? I think those are 4 very basic and sort of core fundamental reforms that we should be willing to think about and willing to try out.
Yeah.
And Josh,
All right, yeah. Well, any comments or questions about what we just heard?
Who is that?
That person or the guy that was talking?
This lady.
That's Annie Crawford. She's a writer and speaker that does a lot of work for the symbolic world. And she's a C.S. Lewis scholar. And me and my co-author Joshua were invited on this podcast, but I don't really like to go on podcasts, so I asked her if she would go in my place. But maybe now that I've been doing this series for church, I'll have more confidence in speaking, go on podcast. But I'm glad I put her in instead of me, because she's very, very engaging, and I liked what she said about the tree analogy. Yeah, that was helpful. Any other comments or questions? I try to apply these boundaries myself. One boundary that I like to do is I'll compartmentalize. I'll use Evernote. So I like to use my phone as a medium of boundaries. So I have Evernote, which is on my phone and synchronized with my computer. And if I'll have a list of like videos that people have asked me to watch, another list of stuff to do at work, another list of my miscellaneous admin to do at home. And whenever I think of something or somebody reminds me of something, I'll just add it to one of those lists and then put my phone away. And then that frees my brain from having to hold on to it. And then when it's my time online, I'll go through the YouTube videos that people have asked me to watch, or if it's my time for replying to emails, I'll go through my email list, or if it's et cetera, so that rather than just having one long to-do list, I'll chunk it into different sections. And then whenever something comes up that involves entering into the electronic ecosystem, I'll just make a note of it and then put it away from my mind, and then when it's my time to be online, I can hammer that out. Another boundary that I use, and I think I shared about this before, there's a box. Because when I learned that the potential to be interrupted stops us from being able to fully focus, I realized I have to do more than merely resist the distractions from my phone. I have to remove even the potential to be distracted, since potential distractions leave us in a state of continuous partial attention, even if those potential distractions are not actualized. So the other day when I was coming for Stations of the Cross, I guess there must have been a crash or something, because my GPS directed me through Reston, and it was a new area for me, and I was really loving the nature, but I was distracted by my phone because I was expecting a potentially stressful text message. And I try not to use my phone when I'm driving at all, but I was like thinking, when I get to church, I'll check my messages. And I was like, I don't need this. Phone goes in the box, 2 hours, and then I'm like, I'm free. And then I suddenly realized I didn't know where I was. Yeah. So I was driving around like a madman. No idea where I was. I went past Powers Brewery, and I was like, okay, I've been to Powers many times. I'll be able to get here. But when I'd gone to Powers Brewery, I had submitted my mind to the algorithm and never really paid attention. And so anyway, I eventually made it, but that was, it showed me how dependent I had been on my phone that I can't even find my way around anymore. But yeah, anyway, so boundaries. I wanted to just clarify about my comments about Hitler, just so that there's no misunderstanding. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about what I was saying about perception gaps, but also clarify what I was saying about synthesizing different views when things are evil. So, so here is a picture of the bad person. I feel kind of bad bringing him into church, but conflict with Hitler was a good example of how things often go wrong because we think we understand the enemy, even though our attempts at understanding have been superficial. Hitler had written his biography, Mein Kampf, as early as 1925, but instead of understanding his evil aims on his own terms from inside his own distorted system, the British interpreted Hitler through the lens of their own perspective. And thus Neville Chamberlain truly believed that Hitler was telling the truth when he promised not to expand beyond the annexation of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. But had they understood Hitler on his own terms, they would have realized that he would be satisfied with nothing short of world domination. And then they could have crushed the dragon in the egg. But of course, nobody wanted to really understand because World War I was so fresh. And this story is told in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers. Just a super fascinating set of stories with lots of stories from war and espionage about how we misread strangers when we think we understand people and situations when we really don't, and when we're really interpreting them through the lens of our own conceptual frameworks. And this is an example of something we talked about in the last lesson, which is perception gaps. Perception gaps refer to how well you can predict someone else's thoughts. So if there's low perception gaps and I'm a Republican, that means I can predict or understand or summarize the views of a Democrat. And if I'm a Democrat and I have low perception gaps, I can summarize, predict the views of a Republican. Whereas if I have a wide perception gap, I will not be able to predict, summarize, and understand the views of my opponent. And to be a good debater, you need to have small perception gaps. You need to be able to say, I think what these people are saying is this, I think what these people are saying is this, and here's why I think this is a better position. Or you might be able to say, okay, these people are talking past each other, but I can see, because they have different assumptions. Or these people really seem to have the same assumption, but they're just using different language. So we can really, this type of deeper understanding occurs when we have low perception gaps. And we explored how social media companies, as well as YouTube, and how they made very specific design choices that result in increased perception gaps. There's a certain sort of content that if you expose people to it, and they've tested this, if you expose people to certain types of content for a month, it would decrease perception gaps. But that's not the type of content that is optimized for engagement. Now, the other thing I wanted to clarify, just so there's no misunderstanding, is that being able to understand contrary positions and really being able to have this type of cognitive empathy does not mean you have to agree with what is evil. And when C.S. Lewis got inside the mind of the devil to write the Screwtape Letters, he was not agreeing with Satan. And now, of course, we all have plenty of examples from our public discourse of when this type of cognitive, I like to use the word cognitive empathy, just like emotional empathy is the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling, even if you haven't had the same experience. Cognitive empathy is the ability to think what somebody else is thinking, even if it's different from your own thoughts. like C.S. Lewis did in Screwtape Letters. And we all know what this looks like when this isn't in place, because we have lots of examples from our public discourse. Yeah, there's no funny. So the point, why am I bringing all this up? The point is that we need to be really cautious about the type of digital content we expose ourselves to. We need to ask, is this likely to increase or decrease perception gaps? Will this help me better to understand the people with whom I disagree, or will this just burrow me deeper and deeper into ideology? And so this is oh yeah, so the other thing I wanted to clarify is, and many people have asked me this over the years when I've talked about this, and moral issues or to do with things with good and evil, should we really want to understand why thoughtful people have different views? Should we really try to understand someone else's position in the context of their own framework? Now, I've already given an example from tactics and strategy, why it's useful to really try to have cognitive empathy even with evil people for purposes of war and strategy. But even in our own evangelism and our own work with people who are hungry for Jesus but don't realize they are, and people who advocate morally wrong and evil things, it's important to be able to understand the position in the context of their own framework, because then we can better tailor the gospel for that context. For example, we can see that psychedelics does make sense given people's hunger for transcendence. And understanding this will impact how we address the problem of psychedelics. For example, by stressing the need for beautiful worship and for genuine transcendence. But if we have low perception gaps and just think, oh, everybody that thinks this or does this is stupid, we may miss opportunities for being able to tailor the gospel for our context. I'll give you another example. We can understand that marrying robots, although on one level totally stupid, it makes sense once someone has accepted that human beings are just complex machines anyway. And then instead of just dismissing people as stupid and willfully ignorant, we can have a conversation about anthropology and metaphysics and what it means to be made in the image of God. Similarly, when we understand that contemporary man has been conditioned to view freedom non-teleologically, then it makes sense why a thoughtful person would think we can switch genders. And rather than just saying you're stupid, we can have a conversation about what it means to actually be free and how the modern notion of freedom, which leaves us infinitely malleable, is actually a form of bondage. But to have these types of deeper conversations in our cultural discourse, we need to be able to exercise cognitive empathy, low perception gaps, to really be able to listen to what people are saying. And this means taking a break from the superficial world of podcasts, social media, shallow news, and to seek out thoughtful scholars and academics who really help us to be more reflective and to reach deeper levels of understanding. To find programs and channels that are not optimized for engagement, but optimized, quote unquote, for being thoughtful and reflective. Like the Mars Hill audio journal that Ken Myers does, that has really helped me in this, and that's just an example. And there are a lot of similar resources, but you really have to look beneath the surface and get beyond content that is optimized for engagement. Because content that is merely optimized for engagement, it entertains us through feeding our rage, our passions, and our desire for novelty, and our desire for alarm, for fear. Did you know that they've done studies when a depressed person, talks about things that are wrong or bad, they actually get a slight dopamine rise. When we're upset or scared and things feed that, there's actually a slight dopamine uptick that occurs. That's why we want to take a break from content on the internet that feeds this. Now, this is all to do with content, but the most important boundaries go beyond the specific content to the messages embedded in the medium itself. And we're all familiar with Marshall McLuhan's famous quote, "The medium is the message." He realized that baked into every technology are certain assumptions. Even a pair of scissors has certain assumptions about ourselves and the world. And because the smartphone is a reality mediating device, it nudges us into certain postures towards the world and certain postures towards ourselves and to others that are not neutral. And it's easy to critique the actual content coming through these devices, but really to understand the type of boundaries we need to kind of take a more meta-analysis and look at what the medium itself is saying, independent of the specific words that are coming through it. And just to help us unpack this, I'm going to share another short clip from Joshua Pauling. And he really helped me to understand this. He really helped me to understand how our tools are not neutral, but have certain tacit ideas of the world baked into them, if you will.
To technology, that's, I think, what we need to do with technology, is that technology itself, like a movie, has embedded in it a worldview and values and meaning that are being communicated to us as we use the technology, and we're being formed in the meaning and the values and the worldview of the technology as we use it. But most of us don't know how to read that. We don't know how to see that. And so that's a lot of the cultural apologetic work I'm trying to do, is trying to help people have the tools they need to not just read the words that Barbie's saying, but to read the forms, that the worldview that is coming through the plot, that's coming through the characterization. And so we need to have technology, we need to learn how to read the meaning that's forming us in our social media and our various forms of technology that we use.
Yeah, that's so good.
It's right on. That's really why we wrote the book, It's exactly what we're trying to do in the book. Trying to get us to think about how technology is forming us, or maybe even deforming us, and what it means to be a human being. We talk a lot in the book about how technology is not neutral, right? I think that's what you're getting at there as well, Annie, right? That baked into the technology is a certain assumption about the world, a certain assumption about what it means to be a person. And so what we need to do is sort of peel back the layers, right? Layer by layer, so that we can understand the technological environment that we're in. And then we're going to be better able to then deal with it, right? And live a Christian life and respond to it. So yeah, in the book, that's really exactly what we're doing. We're trying to peel back the layers, right? To help people get a better understanding of the technological environment we're in. That technology is not neutral, that it's always nudging us in a certain direction. Now, that's not to say that it's evil. That's not what we're arguing in the book. We're not arguing that technology is bad. But we're also not saying that it's neutral, right? And I think a great example to make this sort of drive this home is to think about how many tools, you're in a workshop there, Annie, many tools are designed for the right hand, okay? to be used by a right-handed person. Even scissors are designed for right-handed use. So that technology, that pair of scissors or a certain tool that's meant for the right hand, it's nudging you as a person to use your right hand, okay? So it's not neutral. And we encounter that every day, right? From the shifting mechanisms on a car are all for the right hand, scissors are for the right hand, on and on we could go. If you're a left-handed person, you experience that a lot, right? Right-handed people don't even realize it because we favor the right hand. Now that may seem like a silly, minor example, but that's always happening with technology. It's nudging us in a certain direction. And if we can help people realize that, then we're on the right track, right? Then we can go from there, how we respond and so forth. So in the book we have sections that deal with technology and education. We have sections that deal with technology in the church, technology in the home, technology in politics, society. And what we're trying to do is sort of walk people through how to think about it and then what to do about it.
Back to technology, that's, I think, what we need to do with technology.
So once we realize that technology is nudge us in a certain direction, then one example of that is the clock. So the idea that you could cut time up into smaller and smaller pieces is an idea that, as far as I'm aware, did not exist until the mechanical clock. And historians have also studied how the map changed how we orient ourselves to space. And this isn't to say that these technologies are right or wrong, but they're not neutral. They're not neutral because technologies bring with it a certain way of viewing the world, just like the clock brings a certain way of viewing and thinking about time. And once we realize this, then it opens up space for this whole conversation about boundaries. And I've suggested that boundaries are an invitation for us to reject binary thinking in favor of prudence. And I think of it like automobiles. So I happen to think that cars have had a bad influence on the world. I believe that cars have had a detrimental impact on human society. Other people think that cars have, and of course cars have also had benefits, but some people would say the net benefit of cars has been good. But whatever we think about that, given the fact that we live in a world that has now adapted itself to the automobile, given that we live in a world where you can't really survive without driving, it becomes imperative for us to teach the driving skills and virtues to our children. Similarly, whether we think that the smartphone is good, bad, or neutral, we should all be able to agree that we live in a world that, because it has become dependent on these technologies, requires us to teach the boundaries and skills and virtues to our children. So even if you think that phones are bad and the internet and digital, let's just say digital interfaces, even if you think that digital interfaces are bad and should never have been invented, we should still all be able to agree that, given the type of world in which we live, it is imperative that we teach the skills and boundaries to our children, just like we teach driver's ed. You wouldn't hand your child, you wouldn't even hand your 15-year-old the keys to the car and expect everything to be fine. First, you would train them and you would model good driving to them and give them instruction in the skills and virtues and habits of mind constitutive to flourishing on the road. Similarly, you don't want to just hand your 6-year-old or even your 16-year-old a smartphone and expect everything to be fine without training, boundaries, and modeling. And this is even more true now that AI is becoming integrated into all aspects of society. Whatever our views are about AI, whether we think it's good or bad or neutral or somewhere in between, whatever we think about that, the fact that we are accelerating into a society that is where AI is integrated into all aspects of life, that necessitates that we teach our children skills and virtues. And here we may draw on the wisdom of C.S. Lewis, who remarked, "Good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered." Similarly, we have a mandate to teach good habits when using AI and digital interfaces for no other reason than bad habits must be addressed and mitigated. And that means information literacy. Now, information literacy can be broken down into these 4 domains to do with information retrieval, information evaluation, information behavior, and information habits. Habits is really a subset of behavior, but I've made it a separate section. And we haven't talked a lot about AI in this series, but I do want to just point to some of the questions about AI that as parents and educators we need to address within these domains of information literacy. There's, of course, questions of information retrieval. What type of research are large language models and other types of AI suited for? And so on and so forth. I'm not going to read all these questions, but they become very important as we are emerging into a world that is increasingly interconnected with AI in all aspects of life. And then, of course, information evaluation. We want to know, we want to teach our children how neural networks are produced and how this informs our evaluation of the content that they spin out. How do you fact check content that's generated by AI and systems like ChatGPT? Are systems like ChatGPT neutral, or do they reflect the worldview of the content that they've been trained on? And what virtues are important when performing due diligence on material produced by a chatbot? Last time we talked about the epistemic virtues. So these epistemic virtues become extremely pressing in a world that is increasingly being adapted to AI. And then behavior, like this is within the context of education. How is it appropriate to behave with content that's produced by systems like ChatGPT? Is it appropriate to use content from a bot and then put it in your own words and so forth? I don't have the answers to all of these questions, but these are things that we have to wrestle with as parents and teachers. And then, of course, habits. Let's look at this last one here. What types of offline behaviors help one to be virtuous when interacting online with AI? And we could ask this about digital interfaces in general. What type of virtues and behaviors and good habits do I have to cultivate when I'm offline, so that then when I go to use the digital interface, I'm doing it in a way that that reinforces good habits and virtues. Now, none of these, of course, that's all a different talk and so forth. But I just want to share some of these larger questions that we are going to really need to wrestle with in the days ahead as parents and educators. But none of this will work unless we cultivate a positive vision rooted in higher goods. And that's why I shared that last clip from Joshua about the need to intentionally cultivate a positive vision, even in like how you lay out your house and so forth. And for human desires to be truly formed and shaped towards truth, goodness, and beauty, we can't just remove the bad things. We have to replace them with better things. I'm going to say that again. We can't just remove or restrict the bad things. We have to replace them with better things. And the possibilities are endless, but at the very least, we might consider some of the following suggestions. You can take digital Sabbaths to focus on higher goods, like reading and reflection, family, fun and games, arts and crafts. Develop hobbies that require bodily skill and mental acuity, like art, music, traditional handicrafts, woodworking, car repair. Host phone freedom events with other families, like phoneless feasts, phone-free sleepovers, phone-free dances, maker days, or sporting events. Hone the art of conversation with your family through structured conversations or unstructured conversations. When people are on a hike, or if they're in the car together and the phones are off, unstructured conversation will naturally happen. It will naturally happen when the phones are off and when you've removed not only actual distractions, but information potential. These positive activities might be compared to the strategy of the Greek hero Orpheus when he sailed near the island of the Sirens. Now, most of us are I don't know why it keeps changing without my volition. Most of us are familiar with the story of Odysseus when he sailed past the island of the Sirens. These were bird-like female creatures who would lure sailors to their death through the bewitching music. Sailors would hear the songs of the sirens, and they would be overcome and have to follow them, and they would starve to death, dying, listening, unable to pull themselves away from the music. And so Odysseus, he instructed his sailors to put wax in their ears and to just row, but he wanted to hear the music. So he had his sailors tie him to the mast and order them to ignore his pleas, the pleas that he would issue to divert from course. And so he tied himself to the mast and thus resisted their bewitching music. And Chesterton pointed out to me that when Orpheus had to pass in hearing of the sirens, he used a different strategy. He took out his lyre or his harp, and he played music that was more beautiful than the sirens. And that was his strategy for being able to pass by their isle without being lured to his death. One might say that Orpheus cultivated a positive vision that made the siren song pale into insignificance. And I encourage families to find ways to imitate Orpheus, to create activities and environments that offer grace and beauty deeper than anything that our digital distractions have to offer. And in fact, the approaches of Odysseus and Orpheus are complementary. We need properly curated environments and routines to bind us to good habits, just as Odysseus bound himself to the mast. And when framed and understood within an intentionally positive vision, even the forms of self-denial and self-discipline that we practice have a larger purpose, pointing us toward higher goods and ultimate ends. then even such self-imposed limits become a joy and actually are invigorating and liberating. Ironically, when our devices become maladaptive, it is because they're hijacking our primal longing for higher goods, just like the sirens were able to hijack the longing the sailors had for beauty and transcendence. No one wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I want to be addicted to social media, or I want to spend 3 hours doom scrolling today. Rather, bad habits and digital dependency gradually evolve through the misdirection of our longing for connection, for community, for productivity, for significance, for knowledge, and for joy. So the key to developing well-ordered habits and routines is to find ways to meet these primal needs in ways that are truly satisfying, rather than merely leaving us empty. And this positive and attractive vision is a vital key, no matter what specific rules and restrictions you ultimately adopt. The most important thing is to situate your approach within a positive vision of human flourishing with family and with community. So I thought we could stop now and have some questions and discussion, and you can share some of the own strategies that you've used in your families and lives, and as well as asking any questions you may have about the content of today's message.
I was wondering, do you suggest having one of those boxes when you have guests over and just have everybody put their cell phones there? I know. Have you suggested that that's what we should do when we have guests over for dinner or whatever? Just everybody puts their phone in the
I have not suggested that because that's very radical. But they make bigger ones of those.
Yeah.
And there's different companies. There's some that you have to like click on something when you go out that releases your phone, and they have big like group boxes that you can put them in.
Do they make child-size boxes?
Child did. Are you wanting a way to get rid of your cats?
You talked about perceptions, right? In the context of conversations you had with perhaps someone with whom you disagree, or not necessarily someone who's spouses of you, you're just not in agreement with. And it's nice and all right thinking about, I guess, a more less novel way of thinking about it, be open-minded to know the other person's perspective and talk about, whatever, to engage that person and listen. Do you think there are also times where engaging in certain conversations, I don't know, like thinking about certain topics, I mentioned that perhaps by engaging them intellectually, you're validating their nonsense. So like it's truly nonsense what they're espousing, right? Sorry, think about transgenderism, right? As much as you may want to put it here, that and the other, inherently, it's just not a very sound way of thinking about humanity. Nobody does that by, consistently, right? So you engage in those conversations, intellectually, you're validating their pseudo intellectual. I'm not saying that I believe in what I'm saying, but the point is, do you think there's something to that or no? Like the evangelistic Christian ways to, not every one of us, but if you're interested in that kind of topic or other topics like that, the culture is going at you, then you should have I think you said, not the opposite of lie, mirror perception, so you understand. Perception, small perception.
So yes, I do think there are times when, and maybe Father has some thoughts about this, but I do think there are times where it's not appropriate to argue with somebody. It says in the Proverbs, Sometimes it talks about not answering a fool according to his folly. And sometimes to engage with somebody over an issue will merely suck you into their chaos. But what I would say is that having a low perception gap helps you to know when it's that type of occasion and when it's an occasion where you really can help this person by trying to understand them. And even in situations where trying to reason or argue with people is not going to work and we have to fight, like with Hitler, having a low perception gap is necessary for strategic engagement. Like the best generals are able to intuit what their enemy is going to do because they've been able to get inside their mind. And of course, that isn't for everybody. That can be dangerous. When C.S. Lewis was writing the Screwtape Letters, it took a toll on him spiritually, I've been told. But yeah, so I would say being able to understand somebody with low perception gaps actually helps you know when this is a situation where I'm just going to be drawn into chaos, and this is a situation where I just need to rebuke them versus really work to understand and debate the issue. I mean, that's what I think. Right, this is very, very complicated, and this is the issue that we face more and more in our culture. So I don't know if that's correct, but those are some of my initial thoughts about your question. Does that make sense? Does anybody else have any more questions or observations? I've left plenty of time today for conversation. Yes?
You mentioned that story about getting lost without your GPS. And I was a little surprised when you sort of moved past that without a lot more commentary.
Oh.
One of the things I think about is the fact that I can't really get anywhere without GPS, quite frankly. I'm not really sure what to do about that. Especially like if you have a job where you have to go places that you don't really go very often, right? What do you really do about this dependency?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Somebody start saying something over here?
What's one time we got around without GPS? Better, some worse.
For being my age, I remember when there was no phone, no cell phone. And I had to do my atlas with me everywhere. And I had to learn how to read map. And I got so turned around, even if I was to come back, my card said, "Don't follow me, I'm lost too." So
stuff, but you know, it always ends up getting us somewhere interesting. You find a cool little restaurant, you end up being like, wait, I didn't know that you could get here going this direction. And you just kind of figure it out. That's great way to do it. Just get lost on purpose. That's fun.
So I also think that driving without a GPS develops an eye and skills that we don't necessarily have. Like you just become so more in tune with the geography around you and landmarks or whatever it may be. I have a love-haters relationship with my phone, and so about 5 years ago I switched to a flip phone. Maybe it was like 10 years at this point. And when I had to go someplace I didn't know anymore, I got up on MapQuest and I print off directions, and I took it with me. But getting there, I was so much more aware of buildings I was passing and trees I was passing and parks or fields or whatever it was, because my MapQuest only got me one direction, right? So I sort of had to like go it backwards getting home, which wasn't as easy, but I just had to be so much more aware of everything I was passing. And I think that's the danger of GPS, is we just drive and we completely zone out on what we're passing because we're just waiting for the voice to tell us. And so I think we've lost that skill, and you develop it over time, and you're more aware of your surroundings. So it does get easier, but we also have to build that skill within ourselves.
Yeah. I've definitely found that part of my brain, the spatial awareness, geography awareness, has shrunk since I've become dependent on Google Maps. But any technology that you use will shrink will shrink part of your brain, and it may enlarge another part of your brain. So any technology will cause certain skills to go into atrophy. And I don't really worry about that too much in my own life. It's like, okay, so, well, it depends what the skill is. So, like, I don't have the skill for riding a horse and buggy, but that's not really something I want. But if like, my dependence on large language models meant that I lost the ability to write, okay, that would be a big deal, because writing is related to character, because it helps with for thinking. Writing is very much related to thinking well, as Jordan Peterson has showed. So I tend to think of map reading like horse and buggy. You know, that's something that I'm happy to let that go. Now maybe I shouldn't, but I like it when my phone can simplify my life. I love it when I can leverage technology to make my life simpler. So if I don't have to like worry about reading a map anymore, but then once in a while I'll get lost because I don't have those skills, I'm happy with that. I love using the systems on my phone, on my computer, in Microsoft's systems, even AI in some contexts, if it helps make my life simpler. So maybe I'm just lazy. I know that this will blow your mind. So when Eskimos, it's very sad actually. Eskimos are very in touch with the daylight, the weather patterns. They could tell a little bit the shape of that snow over there means that there's a cliff I have to be careful of. And they go out on their snowmobiles hunting and traveling, very tuned to their surroundings. Once they started getting GPS, they started going off cliffs. They started dying. They started running into polar bears. Well, cliffs. I know they went off cliffs, which is sad. I don't know about the polar bears. But because they had a false dependence They had a false sense of, the GPS gave them a false sense of security, so they stopped paying attention to their surroundings with, in some cases, fatal consequences. Does anybody else have any more questions? Father Patrick?
Well, I was just thinking, this is anecdotal, but you think about the devastation that phones have had on relationships, and that's obviously the case, is thinking about marriage. But I was reminiscing about riding around in the back of the station wagon without a seatbelt with my parents when my mother was trying to navigate off of a map with my dad, and how many times this almost came to the brink of divorce. So I have PTSD about that. So in some ways, phones might be piecing couples together. Navigation.
Wow.
No, you're really right.
Brian?
So there are a couple minutes over features.
What?
We're not, it's already being reviewed as more visible features, but you can keep the.
Oh, okay. Very good. Yeah, we can stick around and chat. Somebody had a thing, yes.
This might be helpful for somebody, and I told my children this as well. One thing that I did with my email, because I don't like to be on my phone much, try to minimize that, is I just set it to the only notifications I get are from actual individual people, first of all. And then when I go through my emails very quickly, I just do a real quick run through. If I see something that I really need to pay attention to, I'll put a star next to it. And so that way, when I do stretching room, physical therapy, doing something else, I'll usually multitask, read that email later. That way I'm not sitting on my phone for the first half hour of my day, just scrolling through my emails, and that really takes my time on my phone.
Good, very good. Anybody else want to share? Okay. Oh, yeah.
One thing from my perspective that I think a lot of people don't have to think about, technology can actually make it very confusing for a lot of people these days. It's like going back to the GPS example, I have a lot of brain damage and I get lost in places that I've been thousands of times.
Oh,
And so like having a GPS is like go out driving without electricity.
that's wonderful. That's kind of the case with me. I would get lost all the time. I would get lost all the time. I think I probably have something wrong with my brain because somebody tested me and said my visual sequential processing is within the 1% of the population. So 1% of the 99% of the humans are better than me in visual sequential processing. Maybe that's also the case with you. Anyway, I got lost all the time. And so if the phone stops me getting lost and simplifies my life, that's wonderful. I'm going to dismiss all of you, but those of you who want to continue to chat, feel free to come up.